On the very morning a father trusted his only son enough to sign over his lifelong home, he never imagined he'd be left miles away on an empty road with nothing but silence around him. But what happened next changed everything. If you want to know how a single moment exposed a truth that had been hidden for years, stay with this video till the end. And don't forget to subscribe. Your support helps us bring more powerful, real-life stories like this.
The morning sun was barely up when I walked into the Maplewood Community Bank, the same quiet little bank I'd trusted for over 20 years. I'd come to check a routine statement, nothing unusual, nothing urgent. At least, that's what I thought. As I approached the counter, the young teller, a woman named Sarah, who had always greeted me with a polite smile, suddenly stiffened. Her eyes darted toward the security cameras, then back at me. Without saying a single word, she slid a folded piece of paper across the counter as if it were just another receipt. Confused, I opened it slowly. The note read, "Your son's withdrawing your pension. He's been coming in weekly. Please be careful." My heart didn't drop. It froze. A strange stillness washed over me. I didn't gasp. I didn't flinch. I didn't even ask why. Instead, I nodded, smiled politely, thanked her as if she had told me the weather forecast, and walked out. Because in that moment, I already knew something wasn't right. And if my son really was taking my pension behind my back, confronting him now would only make him hide deeper, lie better, and destroy any chance of understanding why he'd do such a thing. So I let him keep withdrawing. Week after week, I watched the digital statements quietly, pretending not to notice as my hard-earned savings trickled away. And while he took the money, I gathered evidence. 6 full weeks of screenshots, bank logs, withdrawal slips, patterns, timestamps, everything. I wasn't preparing for revenge. I was preparing for truth. Because no father expects to track his own child like a suspect. But sometimes the people you love most create the deepest cracks in your world, and the only way to understand them is to let the truth play out, even if it hurts. The next morning, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of lukewarm coffee, staring at the stack of printed statements I had been collecting. Every withdrawal was spaced almost perfectly. Every Friday at 9:12 a.m., every time from the same branch, always the same suspiciously rounded amount. My son Daniel had never been subtle, but this pattern felt less like carelessness and more like desperation. Instead of confronting him, I started quietly observing him at home. He'd rush out early, come back late, skip meals, avoid eye contact. He wasn't arrogant or relaxed, like someone stealing with confidence. He looked nervous, tired, like the weight of the world was pushing his shoulders inward. That only made the questions louder in my head. Why my pension? Why now? Why secretly? I even followed him once, parking far down the street so he wouldn't see my car. He walked into a rundown strip mall. Not the kind of place where someone spends stolen money freely. But he didn't come out with shopping bags or anything. That puzzled me even more. I didn't go in. I wanted the truth, but I didn't want to spook him. Instead, I kept documenting everything. Each Friday, I watched from afar. I'd sit in my old pickup truck across from the bank, pretending to read the newspaper, while Daniel walked in with his shoulders hunched, head low. Meanwhile, Sarah, the teller, would glance at me through the glass, giving the smallest nod to confirm another withdrawal had happened. She wasn't meddling. She genuinely cared, and I appreciated that more than she knew. Week 5 brought the first real break. Daniel made the withdrawal like usual, but instead of heading home or disappearing into the strip mall, he drove straight to the hospital on Orchard Lane. Something inside me twisted sharply, because nothing about that building looked casual.
It was the kind of place people visited only when they absolutely had to. I parked a block away and watched him rush inside carrying a small brown envelope, the same size the bank used for cash withdrawals. Fear crept up my spine, the kind of fear no parent wants to feel. Still, I didn't go after him. I waited in the truck, staring at the hospital doors, wondering what secrets my son had been carrying that were heavy enough to steal from his own father. That night, Daniel barely spoke. He ate 1 or 2 bites of dinner and then excused himself early, collapsing on the couch in exhaustion. When he finally fell asleep, his phone lit up with repeated notifications, messages from someone named Dr. Collins. Words flashed on the lock screen: test results, treatment schedule, payment plan. My heart clenched. Something was terribly wrong. But I needed the full truth before making assumptions. So, I kept gathering evidence. By week 6, I had bank records, timestamps, photos of withdrawals, hospital visits, and a gnawing worry in my chest that wouldn't let me sleep. On Friday of that week, I decided to step inside the bank during Daniel's withdrawal for the first time. I didn't want to confront him. I just wanted to see more clearly. I walked in quietly, staying far enough away that he wouldn't notice me. Through the gap between the line dividers, I watched him with his head lowered, hands shaking while he signed the slip. Sarah looked at him with a softness I hadn't noticed before, almost pity. When he walked out, she looked at me briefly and whispered, "Something's wrong with him, sir. He looks sick." That word, sick, echoed in my chest like a punch. I hated the thought, but it aligned with everything I'd been seeing. I thanked her and stepped outside, watching Daniel disappear into traffic. That night, I laid all the evidence on the dining table. The 6 weeks of careful observation, every piece pointing to something more complicated than simple theft. I sat there for hours, thinking, breathing slowly, preparing myself. I knew I was close to the truth. I knew the moment was coming when I'd have to confront him, not with anger, but with understanding. And yet even then, I wasn't ready. Because no amount of evidence prepares a father for what he might hear when he finally asks, why?
That Sunday evening, the house felt heavier than usual, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Daniel sat at the far end of the living room, scrolling through his phone with blank eyes, but every few seconds he winced as though something inside him hurt. I watched him quietly from the dining table, pretending to read the newspaper while my mind raced. I had 6 weeks of evidence, 6 weeks of silent observation, 6 weeks of fear disguised as patience. And tonight, something in me whispered that I was finally close to whatever truth he'd been hiding. I decided to push a little, but gently. "You've been out a lot lately," I said casually, eyes still on the paper. Daniel froze for half a second, his thumb pausing mid-scroll. "Work's been busy," he muttered. It was a lie, and not even a good one. His company had laid him off 2 months ago. He didn't know I knew that, just like he didn't know I'd been following his Friday routines. Instead of confronting him, I simply nodded. "Well, if you ever need help, you know I'm here." He forced a smile, but his eyes betrayed a storm. Later that night, after he went to his room, I heard a soft thud, like someone dropping to the floor. I rushed down the hallway and found him sitting against the wall, breathing heavily, one hand pressed to his chest. Panic shot through me. "Daniel, are you okay?" I asked, kneeling beside him. He nodded quickly, almost too quickly. "Just dizzy. I stood up too fast." He was pale, sweating, pupils tiny points of exhaustion. But before I could ask anything else, he forced a laugh and stood up, brushing me off like nothing happened. He didn't want me to see. He didn't want me to worry. And that terrified me more than anything he could have confessed. The next morning, I decided it was time to widen the circle of truth. I went back to the bank to speak with Sarah. She pulled me to the side, lowering her voice. "Your son, he's been losing weight. He looks so weak. I'm scared something's seriously wrong." I swallowed hard. She didn't know half of it.
You said he's been withdrawing the money himself? I asked. Yes, she replied, always in person, always early, always nervous. That confirmed something for me. He wasn't stealing to hide a luxury. He was stealing to survive something. So I went to the hospital on Orchard Lane, the same one Daniel had visited. I didn't go inside. I didn't ask about him. Instead, I sat in my truck and watched people come and go, wondering which part of that building held my son's secret. While waiting, I saw a familiar figure walk out, an older man with a clipboard. Dr. Collins was embroidered on his coat, the same name from Daniel's phone notifications. Instantly, my heart began pounding. I wasn't ready to talk to him directly yet. It wasn't my place yet, not until I heard it from my son first. But I followed Dr. Collins discreetly as he walked to his car, taking note of everything, the oncology wing badge on his lanyard, the stack of treatment plans he carried, and the defeated look in his eyes that only someone who delivers hard news daily would have. Oncology. Cancer. The word hit me like a blow to the chest, knocking the air out of me. Suddenly everything made sense. Daniel's fatigue, his secrecy, the withdrawals, the hospital visits, the messages. But I still didn't know the whole truth. I still didn't know why he hadn't told me. That night, as Daniel slept on the couch, curled into himself like a child hiding from the world, I sat across from him in the dim light, tears silently slipping down my face. Not because of the money, that meant nothing to me. Because my son had been dealing with something alone, something terrifying, something that made him believe he had to steal from his own father instead of simply asking for help. I wasn't angry. I was heartbroken. But the time for silence was ending. Soon, very soon, I would have to ask him the one question I'd been avoiding for 6 painful weeks. Daniel, what are you fighting alone? And when that moment came, I needed to be ready not to accuse him, but to catch him when he finally crumbled. The next morning, I woke with a tightness in my chest that hadn't left me in days. The truth was circling closer, like a storm gathering slowly but surely. Daniel was already awake, sitting at the kitchen counter with a cup of coffee he hadn't touched. His eyes were sunken, dark circles beneath them like bruises from sleepless nights. When I walked in, he gave a half-smile that felt too heavy for his face. "Morning, Dad," he said quietly. I wanted to ask him everything right then, but something in his posture, his shoulders pulled inward, his fingers trembling slightly, told me that if I pushed too hard, he might retreat even further into whatever darkness he'd been facing alone. So I took a softer route. "I'm going into town today," I said casually. "Need anything?" Daniel shook his head but hesitated for a split second, just enough for me to notice. He was about to say something, then swallowed it, as if the words were too painful. That hesitation hit me like a knife twist. While he showered, I stepped into the hallway and opened the small wooden drawer where he sometimes kept mail. Inside, I found a stack of envelopes, hospital bills, lab test receipts, payment reminders. Some were marked urgent. Some showed amounts that explained exactly why my pension was disappearing. He had been drowning, silently, and he chose to steal rather than tell me the truth. That didn't make me angry. It made me ache. But I put everything back exactly as it was. I wanted him to tell me on his own. Later that day, I drove back to Orchard Lane Hospital, not to confront Dr. Collins, but to observe again. I needed to understand what Daniel was facing before I stepped into it with him. I parked in the same spot and waited. After half an hour, I saw Daniel's car pull in, his movements slow, almost deliberate, like he was conserving energy. He walked inside the side entrance marked Specialist Appointments. I felt a sharp fear rise inside me, but I forced myself to stay put. 10 minutes later, Dr. Collins emerged into the waiting area. He greeted Daniel with a firmness that felt too familiar, like they had been seeing each other for a while. Daniel handed him another brown bank envelope.
My pension. My stomach twisted, but not because of the money, because of the way Daniel's hands shook while handing it over, as if holding even a small envelope took effort now. Dr. Collins placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder, speaking softly. Daniel nodded, wiping his face quickly, pretending he wasn't emotional. Watching my son hold himself together like that shattered something inside me. When he came out of the hospital, he sat in his car for a long time, gripping the steering wheel, breathing unevenly. Not crying, just trying to stay in one piece. He didn't see me. He didn't see anything beyond the battle happening inside him. I drove home ahead of him, needed a moment to gather myself, to steady the wave of emotions clawing at my chest. When Daniel walked through the front door an hour later, he looked like someone carrying more weight than any young man should. Still, he forced another smile. "Hey, Dad, you eat yet?" He was pretending everything was normal, pretending he was breaking, pretending 6 weeks of stolen pension was just a coincidence. I stared at him, trying to decide whether this was the moment, but I realized something. If I confronted him now, he might shut down, panic, deny everything, run from the truth instead of facing it. So I waited one more day. That night, I heard him coughing in his room, deep, painful coughs that didn't sound new. I stood outside his door, my hand trembling on the knob, listening as he whispered something to himself. "Just make it through the week, please." The sound of desperation in my son's voice nearly brought me to my knees. I whispered back, even though he couldn't hear me, "You don't have to fight this alone, son. Just tell me." And I knew, tomorrow, no matter what, I would finally ask him the question that had been burning in my chest for 6 long weeks. Not with anger, not with accusation, but with the love of a father who was ready to carry whatever burden his son had been hiding.
The next morning, I woke up before the sun, unable to shake the restlessness twisting in my chest. Today was the day. I could feel it. Today, I would finally ask Daniel what he'd been hiding, but I had to choose the right moment. When he came into the kitchen, he looked even weaker than yesterday. His cheeks were hollow, his skin pale, and his steps slow, like each movement required focus. Still, he wore that same forced little smile. "Morning, Dad," he said, voice thin. I watched him pour cereal, though he barely ate 2 spoonfuls before pushing the bowl away. "Not hungry?" I asked gently. "Just tired," he muttered. It was the same answer he always gave, and each time it scraped deeper into my heart. I didn't want to push him while he was exhausted, so I waited. After breakfast, Daniel grabbed his keys, ready to head out. That caught my attention. It wasn't Friday. But he was still going somewhere. I followed him again, careful, giving him space. This time, instead of the hospital, he drove to a small pharmacy on Willow Street. He walked inside, keeping one hand pressed to his rib cage. Through the window, I watched him approach the counter and hand over a prescription slip. The pharmacist looked at him with a sympathetic expression before disappearing into the back. When she returned, Daniel immediately reached into his pocket with panic. He didn't have enough money. He counted twice, hands shaking badly. After a moment of hesitation, he whispered something to the pharmacist, who nodded slowly, then put one of the bottles back and rang up only the cheaper one. He accepted the single bag, looking defeated, almost ashamed. Seeing that broke something in me. My son wasn't stealing from me for selfishness. He was choosing which medicine he could afford to stay alive. He walked out of the pharmacy, gripping the bag like it was fragile. I stayed hidden, my eyes stinging, my breath shaking. When he drove home, I followed with a determination that had turned painful. Inside the house, he went straight to his room. I waited 10 minutes, giving him time to settle. Then
I walked down the hall. Before I could knock, I heard a soft, muffled sound. Not words. Pain. I opened the door slowly. Daniel was sitting on the edge of the bed, shirt lifted slightly as he tried to apply medication to a bandaged area along his side. His hands trembled too much to do it properly. The moment he saw me, he jerked upright, startled, pulling his shirt down in panic. "Dad, what are you doing? You can't just walk in like that," he said, voice cracking. I stepped inside, shutting the door quietly behind me. "Son, I know you've been withdrawing my pension." His face went completely still. The color drained from it like someone had flipped a switch. "Dad, I can explain. I also know about the hospital, and the doctor, and the bills, and the pharmacy." Daniel's breath caught painfully. His eyes filled instantly, not with defiance, but with fear. Fear that I would be angry. Fear that I would hate him. Fear that he had failed me. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't want you to know." He wasn't ready to say the rest. I could see it sitting behind his eyes, struggling to stay hidden. I sat beside him on the bed, close enough for him to feel my presence, but not close enough to crowd him. "Daniel," I said softly, "you don't have to apologize. You just have to tell me the truth. Whatever it is, we'll face it together." For a long moment, he stayed silent, breathing unevenly, staring at the floor as though the confession was too heavy to lift. He swallowed hard. His voice shook when he finally spoke. "Dad, I didn't want you to worry. I didn't want you to see me like this." He looked away, ashamed, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "But I think you already know something's wrong." I nodded, my throat tight. "Yes, but I want to hear it from you." Daniel took a trembling breath, steeling himself. His next words hovered on the edge of his lips, moments away from breaking 6 weeks of silence. And I knew that whatever he was about to say would change everything.
Daniel's fingers curled tightly around the bedsheet as he stared at the floor, his breath shaky, his jaw trembling like he was holding back a tidal wave. For a moment he didn't speak at all, and the silence in the room grew so heavy it felt like another person sitting with us. When he finally lifted his eyes, they were red, glossy, tired in a way no young man should ever look. "Dad," he whispered, voice cracking, "I didn't mean to take your money. I swear I didn't want to. I didn't know what else to do." His words came out thin, almost breaking apart. I stayed silent, giving him space. I thought maybe it would go away. I thought if I just paid for the treatments and didn't tell you, it wouldn't become real. But it's getting worse. He pulled the edge of his shirt up again, revealing the bandaged area along his ribs, clean but tender, swollen, the kind of wound that came from ongoing medical procedures. Not an accident, not a one-time thing, an ongoing battle. "They found the mass a while ago," he whispered. "I didn't want to tell you because I didn't want you to think I was weak." My heart cracked at those words. Deep, sharp, almost unbearable. "Weak?" I repeated softly. "Son, you've been fighting this alone for months. That's not weak. That's impossible for most people." Daniel covered his face with both hands, shaking his head. I didn't want you to feel like you failed. You already worked your whole life for me. I couldn't ask for more. I couldn't put this on you." It was then I realized he wasn't stealing from greed. He was stealing because he'd rather suffer alone than let me feel burdened. That realization hit harder than any confession could. I gently pulled his hands away from his face. "Daniel," I said, voice firm but gentle, I am your father. Your problems are not a burden. They're my responsibility, just like you were mine since the day you were born." He let out a shaky breath, one that sounded like a wall collapsing. "It's the treatments," he whispered. "They're expensive. Some aren't covered. I kept thinking maybe the next round would be the last. But every time I go, they tell me I need more." He paused, swallowing hard. "I didn't want to lose the house. I didn't want you giving up everything for me." I felt tears burn behind my eyes, but I blinked them back. This wasn't the moment for my pain. This was his moment to finally let go. "How long have you known?" I asked quietly. His voice dropped. 6 months. My chest tightened. "And you didn't tell me?" "If I did," he whispered painfully, "you'd try to save me. You'd take second jobs, skip meals, pretend you weren't tired, and I couldn't do that to you." He wasn't wrong. I would have done it all, twice over, 100 times, because that's what parents do. I took a slow breath, steadying myself. "Son," I said softly, "you stole my pension." He winced deeply. "I know, but you didn't steal my trust." His eyes snapped up to mine. He didn't expect that. I said, "You were scared. You were fighting for your life. You made the wrong choice in the right direction." A tear slipped down his cheek, silent and stunned. "Dad, I'm sorry." "Don't be. Be honest. That's all I need." He nodded slowly, wiping his face. His breathing steadied, but his shoulders were still trembling. After a long moment, he whispered, "There's something else." My pulse quickened. He looked down at his hands, twisting them together, afraid to speak the next sentence. "Dr. Collins wants to meet me in 2 days. He said it's important." Important. The kind of word that carries weight. The kind of meeting that doesn't happen unless there's something serious to discuss. Daniel looked at me, voice barely audible. "I don't want to go alone this time." And in that moment, I knew he was finally letting me into the battle he'd been fighting in silence.
The day of the appointment came faster than either of us expected. Daniel barely slept the night before, and though he tried to hide it, the fear in his eyes was impossible to miss. I drove us to Orchard Lane Hospital in silence. Not the cold kind of silence, but the kind that exists when two people are holding on to each other without words. When we walked into Dr. Collins' office, Daniel's hand brushed mine for a moment, trembling. I didn't grab it, didn't squeeze it. I simply stayed close enough that he knew he wasn't alone. Dr. Collins greeted us with a calm nod and motioned for us to sit. "Daniel," he said gently, "I'm glad you brought your father today." Daniel's shoulders tightened, but he nodded. "Let's talk honestly," the doctor continued. "The treatments you've been receiving have helped, but they're not enough on their own. We need a more structured plan, something consistent, something supported." Daniel looked down, ashamed. "I know, I couldn't keep up." Dr. Collins' expression softened. "That's what happens when someone tries to handle a fight like this alone. But you're not alone anymore." I felt Daniel glance at me, eyes searching for reassurance. I gave a small nod. "Tell us what needs to happen," I said. The doctor outlined a plan. Not easy, not quick, but clear. A pathway forward. It would take time. It would take money. It would take strength. But it was possible. That word, possible, felt like a breath of fresh air after weeks of suffocating uncertainty. After the meeting, we walked out of the hospital slowly. The winter air hit Daniel's face, making him close his eyes for a moment, as if gathering himself. When he opened them again, he looked at me with a kind of vulnerability I hadn't seen since he was a child. "Dad," he said quietly, "you shouldn't have to go through this with me." I shook my head. "There's no have to here. There's only a want to. You're my son. This is where I belong." He swallowed hard, eyes glistening.
I thought you'd be angry." "Angry?" I repeated softly. "Son, the only thing I'm angry at is that you felt you had to suffer alone. But now that I know, we handle it together. No more secrets, no more hiding." He nodded slowly, wiping his face with the sleeve of his jacket, trying to hold himself together. When we got home, we sat on the back porch overlooking the old maple tree. It was a place where Daniel used to play as a kid, climbing until his hands turned red from gripping the bark. Now he just stared at it quietly. "I didn't think I'd make it this far," he whispered. My heart tightened, but I stayed calm, steady. "You made it," I said, "and now we plan for more. One day at a time." He leaned back, breathing deeply. "I'm scared, Dad." "I am too," I admitted. "But fear doesn't mean we stop. Fear means we hold on tighter." For a moment, Daniel didn't speak. Then he said something that broke me open in the most unexpected way. "I didn't steal your pension. I borrowed your strength because I didn't have my own." I blinked hard, feeling the weight of those words settle deep in my chest. "Then take all the strength you need," I said quietly. "I've spent my whole life saving it for moments like this." Daniel let out a shaky breath, half a sob, half a laugh, and rested his head against my shoulder, like he used to when he was small. And in that moment, after weeks of fear, confusion, and silence, I felt something shift. Not an ending, not a miracle, but a beginning. A promise. A bond rebuilt, not on secrets, but on truth. As the sun dipped behind the maple tree, casting long shadows across the yard, Daniel whispered, "Thank you for finding me, Dad, even when I was trying to disappear." I placed a hand on his back. I never stopped looking. Because that's what fathers do. We don't give up. We don't let go. We stand beside our children, no matter how dark the road, no matter how heavy the burden, until they can stand on their own again. And for the first time in a long while, I knew he would. Not today, not tomorrow, but someday. Together, we were finally walking toward healing, not hiding from it. That was the real miracle. That was the real ending. And it was enough.